I want to talk about this number 15. This is RFK Jr. Someone had asked me, what yesterday, what are the differences in how his politics have changed? Here he is with Tim Pool at the Libertarian National Convention, where RFK is there. And one of the things that I enjoyed most about, sort of like working with, and again, I wasn't in the same physical space 98% of the time when we did the show. I would run into Bobby, and I would see him occasionally, but it was mostly we would do the radio program, and we would talk either before or after we recorded a segment. And he had a really interesting historical perspective on things. I mean, he had been, he toured the Appalachians with his father, and his father was very adamant about taking him around to different places. And it was, fascinating both as a history lesson of U.S. history and an insight into one of the most famous and prominent, political families. And also as someone coming from Massachusetts, you're steeped in that lore. I find some of this a little bit disappointing.
Father always believed that our country would never live up to its ideals if we didn't make some kind of amends, meaningful amends to the, to the group that was exterminated, in order for us to settle in this country. And I think it's a good aspiration for every American. I don't think it should be a left wing or right wing. I agree with you about the statues. I don't think it's a healthy thing or any culture to erase its history.
So would you condemn Charlottesville melting down the Robert E. Lee statue? They gave it to the African American History Museum, and then got those horrifying photos.
I have a visceral reaction against the attacks on those statues. I mean, I grew up, in Virginia. I know that, there were heroes in the Confederacy who didn't have slaves, and I just have a visceral reaction against destroying history. I don't like it. I think we should celebrate who we are, and that we should celebrate the good qualities of everybody. If we want to find people who are completely virtuous on every issue throughout history, we would erase all of history. And values change throughout history, and we need to be able to be sophisticated enough to live with, our ancestors who didn't agree with us on everything and who did things that are now, regarded as immoral or wrong because they, maybe they had other qualities that we want to celebrate.
All right, pause it here. Okay, hold on. This is what is so off base on this, and I find it even hard to believe that he believes this. And I should correct myself. It's Tim Pool's, co-host Hannah Claire Brimlow, I guess, that was interviewing him. Those statues, were not history. I mean, they're history in the sense that, I could put anything up yesterday and it would be history today, right? But it was not an accurate retelling of history. First off, the vast majority of those statues, the overwhelming majority of those statues were put up 60 years after the Civil War. 60 years after, specifically and not coincidentally, at the peak membership of the KKK in this country, where you had over 6 million members of the KKK out of a country of 100 million people, where Madison Square Garden was filled with KKK members having a rally. And those statutes were put up at a time where there was the peak of the pushback, the post-Reconstruction pushback. Now, I find it impossible that Bobby doesn't know this. And the fact is that it is very quite possibly that some of those statues of some of those Confederate soldiers or generals or whatever leaders, some of those people didn't own slaves, and some of them had good qualities. But the reason why those statues existed, and the whole point of statues, remind you, is to venerate people and to venerate ideas.
It's not a museum.
The reason why those statues existed, the reason why those statues were made of those people, were not because this person had no slaves or this person had good qualities. It's because they were members of the Confederacy, and both contemporaneously and in 1920, when a lot of these statues went up, or in the teens, or whenever it was, they were being put up and they were being venerated because they wanted to maintain a system of slavery. They were fighting for slavery. Whether they had slaves themselves, whether they were great people, whether they were very generous, the reason why they were codified, the reason why they were venerated, the reason why they were turned into a symbol was to remind people of white supremacy, period, end of story.
And to reclaim.
And I would like to know his question about the Confederate flag.
Yeah.
Does he have the same lamentation that we no longer fly the Confederate flag over the capital of South Carolina, over the capital of Mississippi or Alabama, or wherever it is? I mean, and he knows this. He knows this because the nuanced take is tear down the statue, build a museum, so that people can learn, okay, these guys were leaders in the rebellion to fight on behalf of the institution of slavery. And I am all for that. We should be learning that. In fact, if that's the case too, he should be complaining about Ron DeSantis trying to pull all this history out of the books. This is what is so disappointing about this.
And did I hear the beginning of that conversation right?
Yeah.
Were they talking about the Native American people?
I don't know what the hell that
I think he was. I'm not sure. We didn't hear the question before.
Well, I mean that's I think clearly like when he said the people that were exterminated in this country.
God, I learned from my dad we should do something about that, and that is what not.
And
confronting the legacy of Jim Crow.
Well, I will say that would be in keeping with some of his activism at Standing Rock, right? When he was doing showing up there and at least supporting the water protectors there. But so he's not going to challenge at all that co-host conflation of our genocide of the Native American population in this country with the removal of Confederate statues that were put up decades after the end of the Civil War to maintain public support for white supremacy. That is not the same thing as a genocide of the Native American population.
Well, who knows what the question was? He could have been referencing something that we didn't hear. But nevertheless, the point is that he must know of the Dunning School. He must know of the lost cause. He must understand that history can get revised, because certainly he knows that contemporaneously there is an attempt to write that first chapter of history, and sometimes that creates a trajectory of what we understand. I mean, for how many decades of this country did we not recognize what he just stated at the beginning of that, which was that we killed the indigenous people and we owe them something? That is a new idea. When he even articulating that, even the fact that his father articulated was a destruction of history, was a destruction of what we believed up to a certain point. And if he understands that concept, then he must be able to apply it to the notion of, yes, this history was manufactured, that these people should be venerated. The mere existence of a building. If what he's saying about these statues was not the case, then you'd never want to tear down a building either, ever, regardless of where it is or what it's doing at any point.
Yeah. I wonder if Israel's destroyed any historical landmarks in the past 8 months. If we just care about history being preserved so much and heritage sites not being destroyed, or if that's maybe a insincere principle that we're just leaning on for a media appearance.
And he's just the answer is stemming from him being asked it apparently at a rally he called Columbus Day Indigenous Peoples Day, and that's what.
Okay,
that's
so
that's
he
what's
pivoted
downstream
from
of that.
I said that good
question.
thing about Native American. Like I thought, like he pivoted from I
Right.
said that good thing.
Did
about
he do
Native
that
Americans.
completely uninformed? I mean, we should listen to the whole
We
the
saw
thing
him
prior to
do
that
it,
before.
though.
Yeah, but we don't know if the question referenced, statues. I mean, who knows what the question was? I'm just saying I don't want to assume that he made that pivot without being, unless we're going to watch.
She made the pivot
private.
for him by asking the question. But like, if you're living in the rational world and you're making a coherent point about like how we should be respecting indigenous people in this country, or at the very least gesturing towards
Yeah,
it,
Confederates are kind of like indigenous people if you think about it.
you should reject the notion that is being described here.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I think the bottom line is just like he knows better about that history, what it was born from, and it was not a question of like, eliminating all historical facts, and it's not a question of like some type of like woke purity test. It is about, do we want statues venerating the institution of slavery? That doesn't mean that you eliminate the existence of these Confederate leaders. No, you should talk about them, and you can even say some good things about them in the museum that you want to build. But the museum provides the context. It's not just a symbol of a, sort of venerated figure. That's the whole point of statues. Statues are always propaganda. And the question is like, what I've told this story many times before, but when I was in Cuba in 2002, there is a statue of Martí, about, I don't know, maybe 600 yards away from the U.S. consulate or annex or whatever they call it. We don't have an embassy there, but it was an annex.
Okay.
And Martí is holding his hand out. Now, Martí was basically the Cuban George Washington. Venerated leader of Cuba who, fought against the sort of like the Western imperialism there and this and that. And he's holding his hand out like this, basically saying stop at the U.S. consulate. And it's a statue that is, completely weathered, green, copper, and its base is cement, and half of it's weathered away. Mm-hmm. All you see is the big rocks. And it looks like and Martí's a figure from late 1800s, I think, mid to late 1800s. And it looks like that statue's been there forever. And he's got a child in his hand, and he's like holding off. And you wonder, is the child representing like Cuba's national identity or whatever it is? And it turns out that child was Elian Gonzalez, who, I don't know if people remember the story of Elian Gonzalez, but he came to this country with his father or mother, I can't remember which one, in a boat, and I think the father drowned. And Elian was kept with his family, and Cuba wanted him back. And there was a huge fight, and this happened in the mid-90s. And you realize that statue has only been there for 4 or 5 years, but they designed it to look like it had existed for 100 years. And Martí, a figure from the late 1800s, brought together with a figure from the late 1900s, and it's propaganda.
Yeah.
It is creating a history, and now you could agree with it, you could disagree with it, but the point is that's what statues do. And the nuanced take is we got to take that down. And we can put all these in a museum. I had no problem. You don't have to even destroy these museums. You put them into a museum, and you could say, this was an attempt to rewrite history in this country, to venerate people who were supporting slavery in the promotion of what was known as the lost cause myth. Part of that was part of a school of history that was trying to basically say, Black people could not run things in Reconstruction. They had no ability to be politicians or to hold wealth. And that is why whites had to reassert their political and economic power over them. That's what that was.
It wasn't about Nathaniel Bedford Forrest being good on horseback and gallant. It was about the reimposition of white supremacy.
Yeah. And a destruction of like the Confederacy or white supremacy. Let's just be clear. Like this is not the same as the destruction of a race of human beings.
He's pandering.
That's what it comes down
Yeah.
to. He realizes that he said, on one hand, like, how do I cover for the indigenous population? I'm one for me, one for you.
Yeah.
That's what he's doing there. It's really sad. It really is sad. And people are reminding me that it was Gonzalez's mother who died, and his father wanted him back in Cuba,
Right.
and the Miami Cubans were holding him. And so they had, like, I think it was Janet Reno had to go down there with armed people basically and take the child to send back to Cuba. But nevertheless, that's secondary to the work that the statues do.
Exactly.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.